The sound of shoes tapping on the cold tile echoed through the conference room, thick with a silence that felt suffocating. I stared directly at the man at the head of the table, his eyes drilling into me like a pair of steel bits. "You've ruined everything, Stephen. $8.5 million lost because of a string of idiotic errors in the compliance reports." His voice sliced through the air like a razor. None of the other 17 people in the room said a word. A few lowered their heads, some turned away. I stayed in my seat, spine upright, heart pounding like a hammer in my chest. I used to think I was indispensable at Argonex Biolabs. 15 years. 3 different directors, dozens of research projects, and hundreds of hours spent training new staff. But that morning's meeting wasn't about strategy. It was a verbal execution. "We've lost funding from the Federal Health Foundation." They cited serious irregularities in the final experimental process. Inconsistent data, missing records. All of it under Stephen Carter's supervision. William Grant, the newly appointed CEO with less than 6 months on the job, read each word like he was pronouncing a sentence. I could feel sweat gathering along my back, not from fear, from rage, from disgust, because I knew exactly what this was. A calculated lie. Argonex used to feel like home. An independent research facility in Cincinnati, Ohio, specializing in gene therapy. We had once been led by Professor Harriet Levin, a sharp-minded, principled woman who treated research ethics as the backbone of every breakthrough. She retired 3 years ago. Everything changed after that. When Cradon Group, a biotech conglomerate, took over the company, they transferred William from the Florida branch to take control. Numbers, deadlines, and quarterly summaries became his gospel. Diligence and peer review were swept aside, replaced by a relentless race to impress investors. I spoke up, repeatedly, raised alarms about rush trials violating protocol. No one listened. William looked at me like biohazard waste. "You'll clear your office today. HR will assist with the process. As of now, you're no longer employed by Argonex." I stood without a word, walked slowly past the rows of chairs and the mixture of pity and fear in my colleagues' eyes. Some avoided looking at me. A few tried to mouth something but didn't dare speak. Passing the central lab, I caught the eyes of Olivia Ross, the lead data analyst I had once mentored during her internship. Her gaze darted away too quickly, but it was enough. That glance held panic. Not fear of me, fear of what she knew might surface. In that moment, I was certain I had been set up. Back at my office, I removed my ID badge from my lab coat, took the family photo off the shelf, and gathered a few notebooks. But not all of them stayed behind. From the bottom drawer, I pulled out an unlabeled black notebook. I had guarded it for 6 months. My personal record of procedural violations I had witnessed. Tests with no original logs, mismatched chemical usage dates, and most damning, data modifications I had never approved but were filed under my name. I was no longer an employee, but I was still a scientist. And a scientist does not walk away quietly when truth is twisted. I gave the room one last look. This space had been my world. Then I closed the notebook, slipped it into my bag, and walked out. Those who lose are often blamed first, but those who hold the truth always hold the real blade. That night, I sat alone in my 7th floor apartment. A soft, yellow lamp casting light over the open notebook on the table. The handwritten lines, clean and deliberate, seemed like they were made for a jury someday. I never thought I'd need it. But every dot, every annotated arrow, had become living evidence. I started documenting everything back in January, when Crayon officially took over Argonex. No one asked me to, no one expected I would. But after 2 decades in labs, I'd learned that structural overhauls usually signal ethical decay. The first entry was about Morgan Hale, the ambitious new supervisor William brought in from Florida. Young, energetic, and obsessed with speeding up processes. She led the new trial team on a next-gen arthritis treatment. It came with a massive budget and was pitched as the star of the next quarterly report. I noticed issues immediately. The inventory logs for Category A chemicals were missing confirmation dates. The time intervals between testing cycles were impossibly short. I overheard a technician whisper that Morgan's team was always a few steps ahead in data handling, a euphemism for predicting results and adjusting the rest to match. So I observed. Quietly, no confrontation, just recorded. Times, forms, chemical batch IDs, and who accessed what when changes were made. No one knew I kept a separate log. I used my personal laptop, printed everything, filed it all in an unmarked black binder. The deeper I dug, the more chilling it became. On 3 separate occasions, my account was used to authorize changes to safety analysis documents. During hours I wasn't even in the building. One of those times was a Friday night while I was having dinner with my family at a restaurant nearly 40 miles from the lab. I pulled the system access logs using my security badge data. They didn't lie. At 9:41 p.m., my credentials were used to enter the data archive, but my badge had been resting untouched on the living room table at home. Someone had forged access. Or worse, they had a cloned copy of my credentials. I sat frozen, mind racing like cascading lines of code. Within Argonex, only the hardware systems unit could issue replacement badges. That department was now led by Jeremy Burns, the new tech officer William installed after quietly removing the previous security engineer just 3 months ago. I'd never trusted Jeremy. He smiled too much when nothing was funny, and his handshake squeezed like a warning. I reopened archived emails, especially one from Morgan Hale to William, dated 2 days before I was fired. Subject line: concerns about procedure and delays. A short message, but packed with implication. I was being labeled the obstacle to overall progress. This wasn't negligence, it was choreography, and my name had been picked long before. I leaned back, tension stretching across my shoulders. Emotion surged beneath the surface, but I held steady. Rash action wouldn't help. They were playing a long game, but they underestimated one thing. I had designed Argonex's internal compliance system 5 years earlier. I knew its structure better than anyone. I opened the voice memo app on my phone, played back recordings I'd saved when spotting irregularities. One included Olivia whispering to a colleague, "Stephen won't let this go. He always sees more than he says." Hearing her voice again triggered a realization. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. I messaged Olivia, "If you have anything that proves alterations in Morgan's datasets, keep it safe. Don't share it with anyone yet. You might need it soon." Less than a minute later, she replied, "I still have the original screenshots, never submitted them. I had doubts from the beginning." I put my phone down, opened my laptop, and started assembling everything. It was time to turn a pile of scattered pages into a complete indictment. Those who thought they'd wiped the trail clean were about to discover some footprints can never be erased. I spent 3 straight nights at my desk, the only light coming from the same old steel lamp I'd had since grad school. Surrounding me were color-coded folders, dozens of screenshots, archived emails, and timelines showing glaring discrepancies between official reports and raw results. And wasn't working alone. Olivia had sent me her original charts, disjointed, inconsistent, completely illogical. The version sent to the Federal Health Foundation, on the other hand, was flawless. Too flawless. I compared both line by line. The differences were unmistakable and alarming. I began writing the report. Not a summary, but a detailed accusation. With a table of contents, appendices, citations, timestamps, and technical commentary. Every section linked actions to names, locations, and times. Nearly impossible to refute. I created a separate file, a letter addressed to the National Medical Ethics Board. It was concise but clear. There were signs of data manipulation and pressure on employees to violate procedures in order to meet investor report deadlines. I included no speculation. Only fact. Another letter was prepared for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, detailing violations related to the storage of Category C chemicals, which required stable temperatures and strict usage intervals. According to dispatch logs, these chemicals were used repeatedly, with less than 2 hours between sessions, exceeding safety limits by 3-fold. I saved everything to 3 separate flash drives. One was sent to a lawyer I trusted in Phoenix who specialized in internal whistleblower cases. One I stored in a bank safety deposit box. The last was password protected and locked in a safe at home. I knew people like William Grant. They'd do anything to wipe the trail. This wasn't about revenge. If it were, I would have chosen a louder route. But truth deserved to surface the right way, without distortion or spectacle. On Monday morning, I sat upright, wearing a white shirt, a quiet gray tie, and the same navy blazer I wore when William called me out in front of the entire company. This time, I wore it to deliver the truth. I logged into OSHA's internal report system and uploaded all the files under the Emergency Laboratory Safety Complaint category. I also sent a separate message to the Medical Ethics Board, listing every involved staff member and the exact timeline of violations. I didn't forget to name Jeremy Burns, the hardware technician responsible for issuing security badges, the one likely to have cloned my credentials to validate dangerous changes. In the OSHA file, I attached a layout of the surveillance system, highlighting blind spots where Morgan's team frequently operated. After sending, I sat still. For a moment, the room fell into a strange silence. Then came the soft ding of a confirmation email. It felt like an invisible rope around my chest had finally been cut. Later that afternoon, I received a reply from OSHA. Your file has been forwarded to the Emergency Investigation Unit. A regional officer will contact you within 3 days. I printed the confirmation, sealed it in an envelope, and sent it via express courier to the law office in Phoenix. Not long after, my phone buzzed, a message from Olivia. I saw William walk into the office with 2 men in suits. They're not from our team. Something's happening, isn't it? I replied with one line. Keep doing exactly what you've done. Save everything. I opened the window and looked out at the city. Overhead, birds flew in tight formation against the wind. Truth, I thought, moved the same way. Slow, but purposeful. I poured a glass of water, drank slowly. The game had just begun. But I wasn't waiting at a boardroom table for judgment. I was the one who sent the files, the one who triggered the chain reaction. The next morning, I dropped off another envelope at the front desk of Argonex. Inside was a full printed copy of the documents I had submitted, clearly signed, Stephen Carter, former research supervisor, Lab A3. I didn't wait to see who picked it up. I simply turned and walked down the steps. Behind me, my shadow stretched across the sunlit pavement. Ahead, a storm was gathering for a corporation that once thought itself untouchable. I paused for a breath just before the sliding glass doors of Argonex. Not out of hesitation, just to center myself. Inside, I spotted Diane, the longtime receptionist, glance up and freeze for a second as she recognized me. Her eyes darted away as if seeing me was something she wasn't supposed to witness. Stephen Carter, I said clearly. I'm here to deliver documents for the board of directors. She pressed her lips together and nodded. I think they're in a meeting, but I'll make sure it gets to the right person. I placed the thick, sealed envelope on the desk. Inside were printed records of everything I had sent to the federal agencies, with my handwritten signature at the bottom of every section. Before I could turn away, a familiar voice called from behind me. Stefan. I turned. Olivia Ross stood at the end of the hallway, her expression taut. Behind her, someone approached quickly. Cream-colored blazer, hair tied back, eyes full of worry, and something close to despair. Morgan Hale. Can I talk to you? She stood a few steps away, hands clenched tightly. Just 5 minutes. I'm not here to negotiate, Olivia cut in, her voice firmer than I'd ever heard from a technician. I signaled Olivia to step back. Say what you need to, I told Morgan. Right here. She glanced briefly at Diane, then stepped toward the emergency exit. At least let me explain. You know what kind of pressure comes with research timelines. I crossed my arms, gaze steady. Pressure doesn't give you a license to forge data and let someone else take the fall. She went quiet for a few seconds, then looked me in the eye. I didn't think it would go this far. William said it was just a shortcut, to show early efficacy, that the real data would come later. I'm guessing later meant after he secured a few million more in investor cash off falsified reports, I answered. Morgan clutched her bag tighter. I didn't know your access badge had been cloned. Jeremy worked directly with William. I was just told to upload adjusted data before the deadline. You also knew those figures didn't match the actual results. You're not blind. I leaned in slightly. You had a choice. You chose silence. Her voice dropped. I was scared. You don't understand. If I objected, I'd lose the first leadership position I ever had. You didn't lose your title. You lost your name, your credibility, the trust of everyone who once believed in you. Morgan looked down, then back up, this time revealing something closer to exhaustion than guilt. I kept some of William's emails. If I gave them to you, what would you do with them? I've already turned in everything I have to the authorities. If you want to salvage some truth for yourself, you'd better work with them, not with me. She nodded softly. I'll do it, even if it's too late. I said nothing, just turned and left the reception area. As the automatic doors shut behind me, the city wind drowned out the last murmurs inside. I walked across the lot without looking back. My phone buzzed. Olivia again. They've started the inspection. 2 strangers are in the old data vault. Morgan just called the internal attorney. I replied, keep yourself safe. Save every message, every copy. Elsewhere in the city, my lawyer had already received the physical packet, along with OSHA's notice that an expedited review was underway. Everything was in motion. That night, my phone screen lit up with messages. A few old colleagues from Argonex checked in. One sent a clapping emoji, another wrote only one line, thanks for not staying silent. I powered off the phone, poured a glass of cold water, and opened my laptop. More work lay ahead. But I didn't need to look back. Those who should be facing the truth were finally beginning to feel its weight. News had started to spread through Argonex like oil seeping across still water. By Wednesday morning, 4 black SUVs parked in front of the main building. 3 men in gray suits with federal badges stepped out, carrying inspection gear and thick files. OSHA didn't call ahead. They didn't have to. The inspection began at the chemical storage vault, where I had once spotted discrepancies in quantity and usage times. Next came the data archive system, where random adjustments happened to align perfectly with the timing of outgoing reports. A technician I knew texted everyone in Lab B was told to evacuate within 10 minutes. They sealed off the entire Category C chemical storage unit. That afternoon, Kraton Group's legal department sent out its first internal memo. Due to the ongoing investigation, all personnel involved in the Gen T arthritis project must suspend all activity until further notice. Shortly after, Morgan Hale was placed on administrative leave. But what caught everyone off guard was that Jeremy Burns, the security systems engineer, was nowhere to be found, despite being on shift the day before. An internal source said he was being detained for questioning regarding suspected credential cloning. Later that evening, I got a call from an OSHA agent. His voice was steady and clear. "We've verified most of the data you submitted. The time-stamped logs align almost line by line. Are you available for an in-person interview next week?" I confirmed the schedule and sent over a list of potential witnesses, including Olivia and a former employee who had resigned after internal complaints were ignored. Every detail I had recorded now felt like tiles turning over, one by one. On Friday morning, Kraton Group issued its second public statement. All federal funding connected to the Argonex branch in Cincinnati will be suspended during the investigation. That essentially froze the company's entire research operation. The press caught wind. An article in the Cincinnati Medical Journal ran with the headline, "Red Flags in Argonex's Research Practices, Just the Tip of the Iceberg?" It quoted segments from an anonymous whistleblower report, the very one I had submitted to the ethics committee. A day later, it was revealed that Morgan Hale had started cooperating with federal investigators. She submitted internal emails from William Grant, which included direct instructions to shorten chemical handling times and prioritize presentation over statistical accuracy. Part of her documentation included a private recording of a meeting between her, Jeremy, and William. In it, William stated flatly, "We don't have time to wait for scholars to comb through every number. If we have to adjust a little to clean up the report, so be it." Who's going to check? Now, that question had an answer. My attorney emailed me, "The evidence she's providing lines up almost entirely with our files. This is unfolding faster than expected." Kraton Group went into full damage control. They temporarily replaced the entire executive board at Argonex. Those who once raised their voices at me during meetings were quietly escorted out the back door. William Grant, who once saw me as a liability, was no longer appearing in any meeting rooms. Meanwhile, I received a call from a local news outlet reporter. "We heard you used to be a senior supervisor at the lab under investigation. Would you be open to sharing your perspective under confidentiality?" I declined, not out of fear, but because the facts needed to be validated through the investigation, not speculation. I didn't need to be at the center of the story. I just needed the wrongdoing to be exposed, properly and thoroughly. The next day, the Cincinnati Tribune reported, OSHA confirms 27 major violations at Argonex, including at least 9 high-level safety breaches. The violations included improper storage of hazardous chemicals, tampering with trial results, and unauthorized use of internal access credentials. That night, I sat in my apartment, the soft lamplight still glowing. A message from Olivia appeared. "It's official. William has been suspended from all research activity. An independent oversight board is being dispatched next week. The entire building is on edge." I put my phone down and looked out the window. On the street below, cars moved like nothing had changed. But behind those lab walls, a shift had begun. Those who had bent the rules were starting to meet the consequences. No one needed to remind me that justice moves slow. As long as it moves. That afternoon, just as I was about to pour a second cup of coffee, my phone rang. The number was from the Chicago area. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. A man's voice came through, direct and confident. "Is this Stephen Carter? I'm Dean Thomas Rowe, Chair of Applied Biomedicine at Lakeview University. We just received a strong recommendation from someone who seems to hold you in high regard." I paused a moment before replying. "I'm not sure I've done anything worth being recommended for." "Dr. Linda Shepard," he said, "a former colleague of yours. She currently serves on the certification board of the Clinical Medicine Association. She cited your investigation report during a recent research ethics symposium." Linda Shepard. The name flashed through my mind like a signal flare. 5 years ago, she was the head of compliance at Argonex, meticulous with every test result. She resigned after William tightened deadlines and dismantled the review team. "We're seeking someone to lead the ethics and compliance curriculum for our department," Dean Rowe continued. "I'd like to invite you to a preliminary interview. No pressure, just a conversation, but I think we need someone who's been through the system and survived it." 3 days later, I arrived at Lakeview's campus nestled beside Lake Erie. The red brick biomedical sciences building stood tall, maple trees lining the cobbled paths. An assistant led me to Dean Rowe's office, modest but warm and filled with books. The conversation was candid. He didn't flatter or overstate. "Your file doesn't read like anyone else's we've reviewed," he said. "You did what most in this field avoid, exposed a fracture." I didn't offer excuses. In fact, I simply handed him a concise copy of the documents I had submitted to OSHA. He flipped through them, then slid them back toward me. "We don't need more evidence," he said. "We need someone with principles, someone who can teach the next generation not to become the problem." A week later, I received an official offer from Lakeview University, Director of Research Compliance and Biomedical Ethics. Alongside teaching responsibilities, I would design internal auditing programs for partner labs and work with federal agencies to help promote new safety standards. The first faculty meeting took place in a small auditorium. I stood at the lectern facing about 50 people, some veteran professors, others graduate students, preparing to enter the very field where I had nearly lost everything. I shared my story without dramatizing it. I didn't hide the shame of being fired from Argonex, nor did I exaggerate my role. I laid out the systemic failures that allowed misconduct to thrive. A culture of silence, fear of losing one's role, and compromises made in exchange for funding-worthy results. One professor in the front row raised his hand. "So what should good people do in a broken system?" I answered with one sentence: write everything down, then wait for the right moment to bring it out. At the end of the session, Linda Shepard appeared at the door, giving me a small nod in place of a greeting. "I had a feeling you wouldn't say no," she said. Because if you didn't do this, who would teach these kids how to stay upright when everything starts to tilt? We walked together toward the administration wing, discussing the latest developments at Argonex. According to new reports, William Grant had been summoned to testify before the Federal Clinical Data Safety Committee. His chances of avoiding criminal charges were Cradon Group had cut funding to the entire Cincinnati branch. Some of the core personnel had already transferred elsewhere. The rest were drafting statements ahead of the upcoming congressional investigation. Before parting ways, Linda stopped at the steps. You didn't just save a lab with data. You saved an entire field because you refused to bow. In the evening, I returned to my temporary apartment near campus. On the desk was a draft of my teaching plan for the upcoming semester. At the bottom, I had written a note. Don't make students memorize principles, make them understand why they exist. In this field, real and fake are often separated by just a few numbers, but someone brave enough to call out that difference can change the entire system. On Monday morning, as I was reviewing materials for a technician training session at Lakeview University, an email popped up with a chilling subject line. Urgent meeting request. Argonex Board of Directors. The sender was Harold Kessler, the newly appointed board chairman after Cradon Group pulled all funding from the Cincinnati branch. The message was short, requesting a meeting at a neutral location, a small hotel near the regional airport. They wanted to speak privately. No lawyers, no media. That afternoon, I stepped into the fifth-floor meeting room with my personal files in hand, expecting nothing more than a polite conversation. But as the door closed behind me, I sensed the tension hanging heavy in the air. 7 people sat in a row, documents in front of them worn at the edges from repeated reading. Harold stood, pulled out a chair for me. Stefan, thank you for coming. I'll be direct. Argonex is in crisis. All official funding has been frozen, partners are pulling out. A name that carried 30 years of credibility is now tied to the worst scandal in our history. No one objected, no one interrupted. We've dismissed the entire senior leadership team, including William Grant. Our ties with Cradon are permanently severed. But that's not enough. We want to formally apologize to you. I looked at him, saying nothing. Harold continued, his tone slower now. We were wrong to let it go this far. The board failed to act. We stayed silent when we should have intervened. Today, we'd like to restore your professional reputation in full. Your former position, an adjusted salary, and a damages settlement. One of them handed me a draft of a public apology letter and a reappointment contract. Everything was neatly prepared. There was even a proposal to publish it in Ohio's leading medical journal. I read it, folded the corner of the page slightly. You think a letter and a check will fix everything? I asked. No, Harold replied. We know it won't erase what happened, but if there's still a chance to save the lab, we need you. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I opened my folder and pulled out the internal compliance blueprint I had just finalized for Lakeview, a full plan to rebuild research risk management and lab ethics oversight. I laid it in front of Harold. I'm not coming back as an employee, I said, but I'll serve as an independent advisor during the transition. For 3 months, I'll oversee the restructuring of compliance procedures, retrain staff, and supervise the public disclosure of past violations. Harold's face relaxed. The others began taking notes. But I have 3 conditions, I continued. First, the apology must include proof of restored access to my old personnel records. Second, anyone dismissed may not be rehired in any form within the company. Third, the compliance department's funding must be moved from operating to fixed budget to ensure complete independence. The room went silent for nearly 30 seconds. Harold nodded. Agreed. I gathered my materials and stood. Then let's have our attorneys finalize it within 48 hours. As I turned to leave, an older woman on the board, someone I hadn't met before, spoke softly. Thank you, Stephen. Not many would return to a place that betrayed them. I looked back and said plainly, I'm not coming back for them. I'm coming back for those who still believe science needs ethical boundaries. The next day, a press release went live on 3 major platforms. My name appeared beside a headline, Former Research Supervisor Wrongfully Terminated Returns as Compliance Advisor. That evening, a message came in from Olivia. Everyone at the lab read the article. No one laughed, just quieter eyes. They're hoping to see you soon. I didn't reply right away. The training materials on my desk still needed attention. But one thing was clear. This return wasn't about picking up where things left off. It was about cleaning out what had rotted from the inside. Later that week, I received an official email on a quiet evening as I reviewed my next teaching schedule at Lakeview. The subject line, testimony. Invitation, House Committee on Science, Technology, and Health. Attached was a letter from Committee Chairwoman Congresswoman Claire Donovan, requesting my presence at a special hearing on research ethics within private institutions. I sat in silence for a few moments, not out of surprise, but because I understood this was no longer just personal. The Argonex fallout had rippled farther than anyone expected. 3 other companies, including a former Cradon partner, were now under investigation for similar acts, laundering data to deceive grant providers. 48 hours later, I stood inside the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C., surrounded by bright white lights and layers of security. The hearing room wasn't large, but it was filled with seasoned political figures, lawmakers, federal experts, major healthcare fund reps. I was called to speak after 2 representatives from the pharmaceutical industry. Their reports were nothing but numbers and graphs, an attempt to paint a picture of stability, control, and compliance. When Chairwoman Donovan called my name, the room fell into a rare silence. I approached the stand, adjusted the mic, and placed my files on the table. My name is Stephen Carter. I served as a research supervisor at Argonex Biolabs for 15 years. My voice didn't need raising. The attention was already locked on me. During that time, I witnessed the shift from a truth-seeking lab to a report-generating machine. Under pressure from parent companies, data was erased, mistakes blurred, and blame placed on those who dared to challenge it. I presented real versus falsified data comparisons. Page by page, I showed how ethics had been replaced with marketing strategy. What brought me here, I continued, isn't the fact that I was fired. It's that dozens of young professionals in that lab were forced to choose between integrity and job security. And Congressman asked, "What do you believe is the root cause?" I replied, "Current ethics oversight models can't keep up with the pace and financial structure of private institutions. We audit after the fact, but violations happen in real time." That answer led to nearly an hour of questioning. They asked about system reform. I proposed a 3-step model: establish regional independent review boards, require raw, unprocessed data in regular reporting, and mandate legal protections for internal whistleblowers. After the hearing, I returned to my seat, feeling a bit lighter. In the hallway, among the crowd leaving the room, a hand touched my shoulder. Linda Shepard appeared, accompanied by an older woman I recognized from academic journals. "Stephen, allow me to introduce you," Linda said. "This is Professor Vivian Tran, former director of the National Institute for Applied Medicine." Professor Tran shook my hand with firm grip, sharp eyes. "I listened to your entire testimony. It's being added to the federal policy recommendation draft. Some in the industry won't like it, but they won't be able to ignore it." On the flight back to Ohio, I read through the early headlines. The media had quoted parts of my testimony with bold titles like, "Stephen Carter warns, science cannot operate under profit pressure." Within 3 days, more than 20 research institutions across the country voluntarily announced new compliance protocols. Some universities declared the formation of independent ethics boards led by external experts. That night, I received a message from Harold Kessler. "The board just passed every reform proposal you submitted. The compliance department's budget has tripled. If you're still watching, I think what you started is beginning to take root." I stared at the phone screen for a long moment. No response felt necessary. I simply turned back to my lecture draft and added a new opening line. "Silence in a lab can sometimes be more dangerous than a technical mistake. When truth is spoken at the right place and the right time, it can change not just one organization, but an entire industry. And if someone is willing to stand up, others will realize silence is no longer the safe choice." As I walked into Lecture Hall A2 at Lakeview University, morning light streamed through the tall windows, stretching across the desks where hundreds of students waited for the final discussion of the semester in modern research ethics. On the screen above the board was the title slide, "The Line Between Innovation and Deception, When Science Goes Off Course." Unlike regular sessions, today's class included observers from two partner universities. After the congressional hearing and widespread reforms across the industry, the ethics training program I had developed was now being implemented in 3 states. Some schools had begun requiring it as part of their graduate curriculum. Midway through the session, while I was analyzing a data fabrication case from a lab in Denver, a hand went up in the 5th row. A young man stood, tall, hair neatly trimmed like someone fresh out of an internship. "Professor Carter," he said, visibly nervous. "I'm Adam Jensen. I interned under your supervision at Argonex 5 years ago." I looked at his face. The light brown eyes, the way he paused at the end of a sentence. I remembered. A quiet, humble student who sat in the back and always turned in notes more detailed than asked. I nodded slightly. "I didn't think you'd recognize me back then. I just mixed buffer solutions," Adam said with a sheepish smile. "I'm now a PhD candidate in molecular biology here at Lakeview. And I wanted to ask, would you consider being my dissertation advisor?" The room fell briefly silent. I stepped back from the podium and clasped my hands. "I'll review your proposal," I replied. "But if you think I'll go easy on you because we've met, think again." Adam smiled, this time with genuine relief. "I was hoping for the opposite, actually." After class, I was invited to the dean's office to sign a new educational partnership with 2 research institutes recently accredited under federal ethics standards. As I exited the building, another student handed me a copy of the Journal of Biomedical Integrity. The latest issue had just been released. The cover headline read, "Redefining Ethical Risk in the Age of Private Funding." I flipped to the center. The article I submitted 2 months ago was published in full with a note. Author was the lead whistleblower in the Argonex case, now Director of Research Ethics Training at Lakeview University. I didn't recount personal tragedies in the piece. I simply analyzed how structural gaps from budgeting and cross-checking to internal response protocols could enable major violations. More importantly, I proposed 6 measurable ethics indicators instead of leaving them as vague principles. Within a week, 7 schools requested permission to adopt the article for coursework. Some labs even asked me to help convert it into a training module for management teams. That night, while revising slides for an upcoming conference in Atlanta, I received an unexpected email. From Morgan Hale? Just 2 lines. "I just read your article. Some parts made it hard to breathe, but they also helped me understand why you never chose revenge." I closed the email without typing a word. There was no need. Some people have to face their past in their own way. In the hallway near the lecture rooms, I hung a small sign. Research Ethics and Guidance Office, open Tuesdays and Fridays. Beneath it, in blue ink, I had written, by hand, "Where every question is heard, especially the ones no one dares to ask out loud." A student I didn't know stopped to read it. He smiled faintly, walked off, but I saw him take out his phone and snap a photo. Maybe he too was holding a question no one had ever truly asked him to answer. Just like I once did. Stephen Carter's story isn't just about exposing wrongdoing or reclaiming personal justice. It's about unwavering conviction in a system easily corrupted by profit. From being fired without cause, he became a national voice in reforming research ethics. What he didn't stop at revealing the guilty. It set a new standard, that truth, even when rejected, always holds value. If someone is brave enough to protect it. What do you think of Stephen's journey and the choices he made? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow this channel for more powerful stories about life and family.